let's just maybe set a little intention together,
Mm-hmm.
a little prayer intention of our time together, because that feels important.
Absolutely.
Because this feels like, for some reason, a really big deal.
Yeah. Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
It is.
Okay, so I'll just say, dear Great Mother, dear Great Father, please support Tamara and I in creating a container for her voice to be heard, to set forth a space to move through some of the more challenging topics of our time, to cut through the dichotomy of us versus them, to talk about who she is and, why she's here on this earth at this time. If there's anything you want to say.
That's perfect.
Yeah, and so be it.
Perfect.
So it's so rare that I podcast with someone I haven't met before. This is the first time.
Oh.
Like usually I'll have met someone just, I've been in community with them or in contact with them in some way. Like maybe I won't know them fully, but like this is my first time actually seeing you.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, it is. No kidding.
So that's great. I mean, I read your book, so there's a sense of like knowing parts of you.
Right. Yes.
Through that.
Yeah.
But this is, I just wanted to share that. This is
and I think it is so cool that we can do this here so close to where I'm staying, right? Like it's really, I'm excited. I've always loved this place and I've always loved this area. I've lived here twice.
Okay.
And I'm thinking definitely settling here once this is all over.
Really? Yeah. There's something about this place. I mean, I've always felt that about this place, having come here as a child, and the national park and the forest and the land and the people, and
it's great energy.
It's great.
Yeah. It's got great energy here.
It's great energy. So I am just so compelled by your story, and I have been for a long time. And so when I found out that you were living literally down the road from where we live right now, this just felt like an absolute no-brainer to have a conversation with you. And so one of the reasons why I feel so compelled to share your story and at least have a deeper understanding of who you are and share that with other people is because, at one point in my life, and it wasn't nearly as high stakes or as big of a movement as you were part of, but when I was in university, I was part of the student union. And our university at Brandon University had the longest strike in Canadian history with the faculty. And I was the president of the student union and had taken the side of the faculty at that time for reasons that felt really like important for the students and the university. And I was vilified by many people for that choice. And the media really attacked me. And I was on, CBC radio once a week for weeks at a time, was interviewed by Maclean's. There was just and it was an experience that I couldn't quite understand why I had become like such an important voice, as the student union president when there was so much going on. But I remember being, unable to go to the grocery store without being attacked by people for the choice, and how much courage it took to do what I felt was right at that time, which was, siding with the faculty for reasons of making sure there was enough courses for students to take, and that, the course load for the faculty was reasonable. And I mean, there were many, many reasons, but one of the things that gets very difficult when you're inside of a movement like that, and it's got so much momentum, is explaining to people all the small details of why you're making decisions the way you're making them. And what happens when you become the voice of something and what people end up projecting onto you, there's this frustration with a circumstance, and then that frustration gets geared towards the person who ends up, for some reason, catching the media's attention or being the voice of something. And
absolutely.
Yeah. And so I felt that in a smaller snippet than obviously what you experienced. And following that term, I actually left Brandon because of, I really struggled with, I was young, I was 21, and I just really struggled with how people were perceiving me. And I was just
so
like,
hard at that age.
it was.
Wow.
But also totally informative.
Yeah.
And I would never change it or what I did or the stance. But, you know, at that time, I was very much into like labor politics and, you know, part of the NDP party and, you know, just like very much, very political. And then when I saw, you know, the story coming out about you and the Freedom Convoy, and, you know, I'm a firm believer in the ability to protest and to speak up. And I just, I was like, something's up here. I am not buying into what's happening. I am very critical of how media portrays things, even after my own experience of being in the firing line of something. And so that's kind of why I'm like, I want to understand this story and this woman from, you know, this place, because you have definitely been in the firing line here of something that was, you know, much bigger than you specifically. And your book details that so perfectly as you move through like every aspect of the Freedom Convoy and things that have happened and when the media portrayed certain things. And so as I want to get into some of that, and then I'd also like to today move into like, what's next for you? What are your thoughts on what's happening now? So that's kind of like where I'd like to see us going, I guess, our roadmap. But so I want to know, what do you think are the biggest or some of the biggest misconceptions of, I know, we're going to get into it here. I know. So let's start with what you think might be the biggest misconceptions. And let's just start there, because there's many misconceptions about the Freedom Convoy and also about you that I'd like to just dive in right at that point. Yeah.
Well, like I said, that's quite a long list. Obviously, you know, we were painted as racists. We were painted as misogynists. We were painted as insurrectionists. I always say every ist and phobe you could possibly be is what we were called, basically. We were accused of trying to overthrow a democratically elected government. We were accused of attempting to bomb a children's hospital. You know, like all this ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous stuff. We were blue-collar Canadians, end of story, that's it, that had just had enough of the overreach that we were seeing. And in my case, I mean, I didn't know any of these people before this happened. But I mean, I followed the pandemic very closely. Right off the start, something intuitively told me that this wasn't right. And we lived out here. My husband and I moved out here and spent the COVID months, 19 months out here during COVID, because we lost our jobs. And I found people, podcasters like Trish Woods, and Dr. David Martin and Byron Bridle, and I was following these stories very carefully. And so I sort of kept my finger on the pulse of what was happening. I talked to a lot of friends and locals and heard how their lives were being impacted by the measures that were in place, like not being able to see, you know, loved ones in long-term care homes, or, you know, a friend of mine, his mother died in the hospital and he couldn't go see her. All the crazy things that were happening, and there was no end in sight. And it was like, especially at that point when we started preparations for the convoy, a lot of the other countries were starting to ease their restrictions where Canada was doubling down. Right. So, I mean, there just comes a point where I couldn't stand to watch people hurting anymore. I was very upset with the breach of our charter rights, which is, freedom to all of them. I mean, they were all taken away, basically. Right. So I just got a hold of Chris and just offered to help as much as I could. You know, that we never had any idea what this was going to turn into. And
Chris was the other person that was kind of heading up.
Chris Barber. He's the gentleman I rode out with in Big Red, in this truck, Big Red. Yeah.
Okay. And so if I remember correctly, it wasn't really about vaccination versus non-vaccination. No. And even I think you shared that you ended up actually getting vaccinated.
No,
you didn't. No, sorry.
I'm not. Chris is vaccinated.
Right. Thank you.
About 80%, I think, of the truckers that were there, they estimated were vaccinated.
Right.
And so for us, it was never anti-vax versus pro-vax.
Right.
I mean, that was what was painted. But I mean, I have all my childhood vaccinations. You know, I had to get vaccinated to go to Mexico years ago. I mean, but I believe in freedom of choice.
That's right.
And I believe in bodily autonomy.
That's right. And so I just wanted to name that because I think that that's where, you know, I really feel like we're in a time which it's happening again. And we can talk about that of where it becomes this versus like us versus them politics and us versus them, this like polarizing choice, like vaccinated versus unvaccinated. But that really wasn't what the convoy was about. It was about freedom of choice.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And of course it started, the catalyst was, as you read, the trucker mandate that they were going to put in for the cross-border truckers. And so that was really the straw that broke the camel's back, right? And then, of course, as we were traveling across the country and we got to talk to so many people and there was so much support and they were all begging us, like, don't leave. You can't leave until this is over, you know? So it was quite an experience.
And you said in your book that there was, you know, prior to this, you have been politically involved.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so part of that, the previous political work was, or, you know, interest was around more separatist stuff. And then that shifted for you. You spoke about how that shifted for you. Can you speak to that?
Well, it was funny because I was one of the board members for, the Wexit movement that happened here a few years ago. And I immediately joined after the 2019 election. I got a hold of the gentleman that was organizing that and just said, you know, how can I help? I can take this corner of Alberta and, you know, do town halls or whatever.
And Wexit, can you just explain quickly what that?
Yeah, so Wexit was kind of a push for Western independence. It started with basically the province of Alberta. So what ended up happening, and it was kind of parodied after the Brexit movement in the UK.
Right, okay.
So basically West exiting. While I never wanted to separate per se personally from Canada, I do see the mistreatment of Western Canada, especially Alberta. And the Maverick Party, well, we turned into the Maverick Party. We ended up rebranding and renaming. And so we were more focused on independence, like greater independence, as opposed to separation, but also advocating for changes to the Constitution, like, you know, an elected Senate and changes to Confederation so that we have more of a say. You know, it's really something, and I'm sure you've seen it too, you know, every time we have an election, when we're sitting out here in the West and we see before, you know, we're even halfway through our workday here, our election is already decided for us, you know. So, I mean, if you look at the last one, everything was blue pretty well, you know, west of the Manitoba-Ontario border and, you know.
Yeah, and it feels, you know, there's not a lot of weight on our votes or our voices in the West. And so that was a big, you know, part of what you were involved in. And then, you know, as you started in the Freedom Convoy and you were traveling across Canada and you started to see this thread of like actually what this Canadian culture is.
Yes.
Yeah. So I found that to be, so.
And not only that, I mean, it was really eye-opening because, and the same thing is happening right now with Donald Trump, in my opinion. But at that time, on social media and on the news and on the radio, and I mean, a lot of people felt the same way as I did. But we all felt alone because we didn't know that. That's not what we were hearing. And so, and that's one of the things that I heard a lot on the road is like these people in all these communities where we went to, they didn't phone up their friends and organize a meeting at the highway or the overpass because they didn't know how everyone was too afraid to say anything. They just showed up and then they get out to these overpasses and see all these Canadians out there. I mean, I think there was more tears shed, you know, on that trip alone than, well, I don't even know what, but it was, you know, it was very emotional. It was a very emotional and a very spiritual journey for sure. And like I said, to just meet so many people and hear so many devastatingly heartbreaking stories, you know, people that had lost their jobs. I had one man stuff a letter in my pocket with his story, and him and his family were living in their car.
Wow.
You know?
Yeah.
And the little kids with their signs, you know, thank you truckers, or thank you for giving us our freedom back. I mean, it was phenomenal.
Yeah. You said it's difficult to speak up. It was difficult for people to speak up. And I mean that it's still, there's like, you can still feel this like locked voice that we experience. I even think about my podcast really declined during that time because there was, I was having this whole I also had a similar feeling like something's wrong here. It doesn't feel right to me. And that's all I kept saying. I didn't know why. I just was like, something's off. I don't, but it's like this fear of speaking up because all of a sudden you're then an anti-vaxxer, you're a conspiracy theorist, you're, all of these things that just simply for having an opinion about, what's going on. And many people, like my experience was many people did feel that way, but could not speak up about it because of the impact that might have on it, whether their family's mad at them, whether they, lose their friends at their job.
Or if you run a business.
Or if you run a business. I mean, I'm a business owner. It's very trendy
to just cancel business. Like it's, that makes me sad for humanity right now. And I think that was one of the biggest atrocities of the pandemic was I feel like a bit of our humanity was lost, especially when you saw people attacking people that weren't vaccinated. Like, I mean, if anybody else would have held up a sign that said gas anything but the unvaccinated, it would have been an outcry. But there's a photo, there's a person that's, you've probably seen it on social media, gas the unvaccinated.
Yeah.
Like, what does that even mean? And who would even, I don't understand that mentality.
Yeah, I know. Well, and here's the thing. It's like the thing that I think we can all agree on is that it was an extremely confusing time. There was like not really clear information anywhere for anybody. There was like things were changing every day about what why the mandates were there, what the vaccines were doing for us. Yes. It was like first this was going to stop spread, and then all of a sudden it was like this isn't going to stop the spread of the virus, but it's still important to get it. And then it was like, so even in that alone, you could think that we could drum up some compassion as to why people might have made the choices that they made during that time, even if that was to say vaccinate and listen to the government fully. Like I have compassion for those that maybe were like, I'm trying to do what's right and what I'm told is right. And then I also can understand the people that are like, fuck that. I don't trust this. And I'm not going to be indoctrinated. I'm going to figure this out for myself. And I have autonomy. And the thing is that piece of compassion and understanding is something that feels like it's lost. And some of us are getting to that point now, but now we just have a whole new thing that we're all, in argument about and not willing to have this conversation, right. These difficult conversations. Yeah. But the thing that's really, amazing about you is that in that time you like held your guns and you kept stepping forward in your courage to just hold a message, even when everything that's being said about the truckers convoy and you is just like so much of it's false, So yes. One of the things I want to speak to is, because as I said, I was going to podcast with you. There's a few, it's interesting to see people's response, right? So one of them is like, well, they were going to overthrow the government.
Yes.
Right. So let's talk about that because they were trying to overthrow the government, and your manifesto for the truckers convoy is actually in the book and has nothing about overthrowing the government.
Right.
Yeah.
So the overthrowing the government accusations stemmed from James Bowder's organization, Canada Unity, who had already joined. He was already, there was a small group that had already got together by the time I contacted Chris. And he had put together a memorandum of understanding. And it was very shoddily put together. It was clearly not done by a legal expert. I have never even read it. Okay. So that was that was not what I was joining for, right? So, so I think that's where a lot of that came from. There was a lot of talk about the MOU. And when we were it was funny because when we were at the POC, they brought that up when James was testifying. And of course, then we went through a bit of it during the testimony, or he did anyways. And it was quite obvious. It was quite obvious that. So he was testifying on your side? No, he was, they had some of us were subpoenaed to testify at the Public Order Emergency Commission. Right. Yeah. So, it was, and like I said, it was just clearly not serious. So for them to be claiming that, we were coming to overthrow the government. But you have to remember, that said, I mean, that was also the narrative that they were crafting before I even met Chris Barber. I hadn't even shaken his hand yet. And we have text messages that were introduced as evidence during the inquiry with the PMO and I think it was Global News, somebody at Global News, already trying to frame this narrative and get their talking points together that we were crazies and January 6th style insurrectionists.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, that was a big part of the. Yeah. So what was the PMO again?
The Prime Minister's office.
Right, the Prime Minister's office. That's what you mean by that. Okay. Yeah, so that was already, because as the movement, so do you think that was happening because the movement was getting so big, and then it was like, and that was a way to craft, this perspective so the Emergencies Order could eventually be, the Emergencies Act could eventually be?
I think the narrative, I think that they were, I'm scared isn't the right word, threatened maybe.
Yeah.
I think they felt very threatened, especially once the donations started coming in. Because we started the GoFundMe, and I've said it numerous times. Like I remember I asked, I think it was Chris, like, what should we set the target at? And he said $200,000, and I kind of laughed. I was like, as if, dude, right? Like, I said, I'll make it for 100,000, and I said, I still don't even feel right about that. Like, I thought we'd maybe raise 20 grand, right? So, and then of course, I think we blew past $125,000 in donations in the first 24 hours. So I think that the writing was on the wall, and so they really had to vilify us as much as they could.
Right. And eventually, what did the donations get to before they were like basically taken away?
Actually, we raised 24 million in Canadian within a 3-week period.
And then that was actually taken away because of GoFundMe.
Everything was refunded through GoFundMe after they closed us down. The city of Ottawa, the police department there, and of course the government interfered in that. Basically, they tried to treat those donations as if they were proceeds to a crime, like we were some kind of drug cartel or something. So GoFundMe refunded all that money. Then we had already started the Give, Send, Go, and so that ended up getting all refunded except for just over $3 million in donations that was in the Stripe payment processor system. So they seized that, and it's sitting in an account in Toronto.
It's just sitting there.
Yeah.
And is that sitting there until your trial is done?
Well, I think that's going to play a part of it. And also we have the civil suit. We're being sued for $300 million. And so, yeah, like we actually just lost. We had applied for, we'd put forth a motion, and we just lost it. So we've just been ordered to pay $20,000 in costs. Oh. So, and I was actually just speaking to James Manson. He's our lawyer on the way in here today. Okay. And so it's going to be probably at least a year before that even gets to the certification process. So, that's the thing that people don't understand. And it's funny, like we were kind of joking about me getting called names and I've been a grifter and a thief and this and that. And I find, a lot of people, I don't know if they're jealous, if that's the word, but there's a lot of egos involved. And, there's a lot of people that seem to think that Chris and I especially are just living this, life of luxury, and, we have all the glory and all the credit, and which is ridiculous. A, that's not ever what it was about for either one of us. But B, I mean, we're looking at spending at least the next decade of our lives in a courtroom in some fashion.
Wow.
So, and we're not talking, drive down to the Swift Current Courthouse where Chris lives, or Medicine Hat Courthouse where I live. Like, we have to go to Ottawa. That's a 35,000 or 3,500 kilometer trip each time. So, I mean, there's not a lot of glory. Yeah. Trust me.
No. And so so you're being sued for, you said $3 million? So, $300 million.
Yes, for nuisance, for honking horns.
Downtown. And it's you and Chris that are being sued?
There's myself and a bunch of other organizers from the convoy. They've also added the donor class, which is really scary.
So the people who donated money?
Yes.
Are also
for the first time ever. Paul Champ is going after the donor class. And I think there was a stipulation. I can't remember if it was donors that donated over $100 or over $1,000, but I think there was like a stipulation in there so that anyone that donated over a certain amount of money is now going to be in this lawsuit.
So what happens to our right to organize when, this is the thing that keeps coming up for me, no matter what, you believe, or whether, you believe in like what the truckers were doing. My biggest offense here, like personally, feels like it's a huge attack on our civil liberties of the ability to organize when you don't agree with something that's happening. Like that is such an important part of living in a democratic country.
Yes, you're right. However, we're not a democratic country. We call ourselves a democratic country, and we'd like to believe we are. But if you look at it, we're not. We're not. You stop paying your taxes on your home, and you find out how long you're going to keep that house,
right?
Even if you've paid it off. There's so many of our freedoms that have been taken away. You don't have freedom of speech. You can't go out and say exactly what you think and not get completely crushed for it. And especially when you see what's happening in the UK. So we were just over there in France I received an award in December. And actually on their social media, on their X, I think you can, anyways, there's a thing on there where you can report. It was called Report Illegal EU Content, which would be criticizing your government, questioning immigration. And there's a gentleman in jail right now in England, I believe it is, because he called a politician a moron on social media.
Wow.
And so this is why, like, I'm not going to give up, because there's a lot of changes that have to be made. Our political system is not set up to benefit us. It is set up to benefit Ottawa. The Laurentian elites is what they say. Now, and I used to think that was kind of all nonsense, but one thing I have said to my friends in Alberta is, it's not funny, but I kind of laugh. I said, no matter how bad you are corrupt, we thought Ottawa was, or this government was, out here in Alberta, it's 100 times worse than what you actually think it is. And I just think there's changes that we have to make to our constitution. We have to have a way to get to recall or get rid of our prime ministers if they're not serving our people. We just went through 10 years of hell. Yeah. I mean, in my opinion, that was a reign of terror.
Yeah, and then a prorogue of parliament.
Yes.
That was done strategically so that the Liberal government would be able to call the election when they're in a stronger place to call an election.
And so how is that to the benefit of Canadians?
Right.
That benefits the Liberal Party. And at the end of the day, I've always been a bit of a romanticist, I guess, but we need people in there who care about Canadians.
Well, and I would say even that are willing to have diverse conversations. And when I mean diverse conversations, I mean like getting outside of the echo chamber of like left versus right. Like I'm so done with the labels, this place that we're in, which is just this like polarized place of like, we clearly need a different way of looking at things. But the only way that we're ever going to be able to figure that out is if we can have conversation about it. But it's like anytime that there's a conversation, if you say something that might be upsetting to somebody, that might put you as right-wing fanatical, then it's like, then no one wants to say anything. And then we just get stuck, you know, and the politics are just a reflection of what's happening, in ourselves and in our society.
Agreed. I agree. Yeah. I think we need to get back to finding common ground.
Yeah.
Right? Nobody's going to think the same or believe the same. That doesn't mean we have to despise each other. You can still get along and find common ground while not believing the exact same things.
Yes. Yeah.
But what we're looking at, and it's come out now, it's proven. I mean, there was a giant psyop. That was a propaganda campaign that was going on
during the convoy,
during COVID.
Right.
By our military. Our military, the Canadian Armed Forces, felt that the pandemic was a perfect opportunity to test out psychological operations on its citizens. And then I think it was last year. There was an article that came out that they've lost all the emails and documents that pertain to that now.
And so where can we find information about that?
There's a couple articles in the Ottawa Citizen.
about this.
Ottawa Citizen about it, yeah.
Okay.
I'll send it to you later.
Yeah,
too.
I will link them in the show notes for people that are like, it's a conspiracy theory.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, no kidding. And by the way, don't you think it's sort of funny? I was thinking about this because, of course, all the JFK, this is totally off topic, but all the JFK documents and everything that was just revealed. And I was thinking the other day, I was like, isn't it ironic that the term conspiracy theory was coined over the JFK assassination? And all these documents come out now, and I mean, it was all true, right? Like the conspiracy theory term itself was just created as a dismissal tactic, but
yeah, for sure. I mean, irony, right?
Yeah,
like
irony.
This is the thing. It's like we're in a really big unfolding that's happening, where it's like all the kind of like structures and all the things that are happening are getting flipped on its head, and some of us are holding tight to like what we like want to kind of like stay in this echo chamber of how we think it's supposed to be, and other people are like dissociating completely and like, I don't want to be connected to the news or anything at all. And then some of us are willing to be like, oh shit, I think the way that I've been seeing or looking at things is completely upside down. It's like it's a very confusing time.
It is.
It really is. Okay, so let's go back to I want to go back to a couple of things about the convoy. So I remember a really specific image that for me that was like, this is a problem. So there was two things. So one was, I was hearing on the news about like these are like Nazis and these are fascist people. And there's that particular news interview, I believe, where there's an upside down Nazi flag, right? Or Confederate flag in the background. And it's upside down. So let's just name that. Like when something's upside down, it's like you're kind of like denouncing it. Yeah. Right?
Yeah.
So that was one thing that I just want to speak to, but there was all that was going on in the news. And then I had people on my social media that were like, hey, I live close to Ottawa. I'm going to go check this out on the ground. So I knew 3 people who took their cell phones and they actually went downtown to where the convoy was happening and shared videos. Yeah. And I'm like, watching their videos, they stayed for a couple of days, and I'm like, what the fuck? This is, this is totally not what it's like. There's like people dancing, there's music, there's like, people hugging, there's Canadian hockey games, there's Canadian flags. And, this was like a family, a man and a wife and her kids went down. And they were just like, we're going to go get curious about what's happening. And then I had someone else on my social media that did the same thing. And so that's when I started to be like, wait a second, something's up here. And then the other thing was when the image of the horses trampling protesters,
Candy.
That like the RCMP, it was RCMP horseback riders. Yeah. I remember crying, and like that was for me, I was like, this is outrageous. Like this is absolutely unacceptable. Even if you don't really care about your freedoms and you want the mandates, like this is not okay. There's an elderly woman that got trampled by horses. And as far as I've seen on social media, these are actually pretty peaceful protesters other than the fact that they're honking horns. Yeah. Yeah,
exactly. I just talked to Candy a couple days ago, actually. She is finally going down to have surgery. They're going to have to re-break her collarbone. But she's been living with this injury now for 3 years, and it wasn't treated properly, of course, and it's healed incorrectly. So she's hoping to get down to Arizona in a few weeks and get it fixed. But I was in jail when that happened, and I remember I called my sister, and she was kind of telling me what was going on.
In the media?
Yeah, like on the street that day.
Oh, I see.
That she got trampled. And I had this vision in my mind, like a war-torn country, right? I was just beside myself. I just couldn't believe they were doing this. And sure enough, when I got home, I spent 18 days in jail. And then when I finally got home in March, I sat down and started watching some of the footage on YouTube. And I just bawled like a baby for 2 days. It was so hard to watch. Mm-hmm. That's the stuff that I grew up watching happening in third world countries. Yeah. Not in Canada.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then to have the RCMP laugh about it, these people were actually excited to go out and lay the jackboots to us.
Right.
And that's something that mentality I don't understand either. Like, especially when you look back and think all they had to do was come out and have a conversation. That's all we wanted to do.
Right.
You know,
You wanted,
we just wanted to say, look at, you know, we've heard for 2 years your side of the story, but you're not letting anybody else speak. And it's time for you to listen to what Canadians want, what Canadians think, how this is affecting them, how the lockdowns are affecting them. By the time of the convoy, there was already vaccine injured coming to the forefront, you know, and nothing's being done to help them. So, you know, these are just conversations that they refuse to have.
And you were trying to have those with the Prime Minister's office.
Yeah, no, and they just refused. And they literally, that's all they had to do was come out and talk to us. Not Justin Trudeau. I wouldn't spit on that man if he was on fire. I didn't want to talk to Justin Trudeau, but they could have sent anyone out, just to at least pretend like they gave a shit. And that's one of the most disappointing things I find, well, there's a few, but of the whole thing is that if the media and the government had a great opportunity to really bring the country together and unite them behind something like this, because it was such a grassroots Canadian movement, but they chose the opposite. They chose division. They chose name calling, you know, volatility over, you know, just having a conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. And hearing the voice of those that didn't feel like they could have a voice during the whole, you know, COVID experience. And so they never actually did end up coming to speak to you guys. No one. Yeah. No. And so all of these details are actually really beautifully laid out in your book. And I just want to say that.
Thank you.
That if people want to get into the nitty gritty of like what happened during the convoy, you've done a very good job of like laying out very specifically. And then this happened, and then this happened. And then, you know, and I don't, you know, we could spend 3 hours going through that. And I would love to.
3 days probably.
I would love to, but I also, you know, there's more to this, but I guess I just want to say that like, it's not what it seemed, you know.
That's right.
At all. And, you know, some of the I would say the biggest things that stood out to me in that was that, you know, when you're organizing a grassroots movement like that, you actually don't get to control everybody that becomes part of it. And I know that because I've organized protests and movements, you know, political movements, social movements. And so that's what happened is like people got on board. Some of those people were way more extreme than the movement itself and loved to get media attention and were picked up and became, you know, kind of like an interest of the media. And you had spoken to that in your book. And so that was one of the things is you don't get to control everyone that's part of it. You know, there actually was a huge amount of organization on the ground, like huge. Unbelievable. It sounds like huge. And actually trying to work with everybody and try to set some ground rules and basic rules of respect and for the communities and making sure that, you know, ambulances and emergency vehicles can get through. At one point, you did ask all trekkers to stop honking after certain hours of the day, right? Like these things that you guys were getting told were issues. You were actually trying to remedy them.
Yes, we were. And Chris put out a really lovely video, a TikTok video about it. You know, like, you know, look, guys, we don't want to upset the residents, right? We don't want to upset the residents. So, I mean, it was funny. We kind of joke about it, but I mean, we joke about, you know, like nobody was more relieved than us when they finally put the horn injunction in, okay. You know, because there was times and it was annoying. Like if we were down on the ground trying to listen to somebody speaking and there was horns honking, you know, sometimes it was hard, but I mean, it wasn't constant. There was, you know, when we first got there, obviously there was a lot of people, excited truckers, and there was lots of horn honking, but pretty much after the injunction, it pretty much stopped. Right. I think there was the odd one. But again, I mean, I didn't even have a vehicle there. I didn't even have a personal vehicle there. I certainly never honked a horn. You know what I mean? I was never out on the street uttering threats or, you know,
I mean, you're the one that's facing jail time for these things.
Yeah. And spent just about 50 days in jail.
Right. And that's the other thing you go over is like, you've never actually, like you haven't even been charged and you've spent 50 days in jail because of, you know, basically tactics from the Crown. Yeah. To like you violating bail orders, based on, you know, wearing a necklace that. Yeah.
I have it on.
And it says Freedom?
Yeah, it says Freedom Canada on it. It's a lady sent it to me from Thailand. Right. But
and so you had a picture of that.
And he tried to throw me back in jail over it actually. We'd called a bail hearing a bail review. Or just basically a hearing to try and have my because originally I was banned from the province of Ontario, but to go back for that award I was speaking about earlier, I had to get permission from the judge. So during that hearing, the Crown prosecutor tried to turn it into another bail hearing and have me thrown in jail over this pendant. So...
But it didn't happen over the pendant.
It didn't. It happened over a photo, but...
It happened over a photo. So that, you know, so what had happened is, for those listening, it's like you got arrested and you actually were like willing when they were, no, maybe not willing, but
I was,
yeah, but like at the on the ground, you said in the book that you guys knew they were coming, and it was like, okay, I'm not gonna, like, it's just gonna happen. And then after that, you got out on bail, but basically were told to not speak to anybody from the convoy, not share your message, not you were
no social media,
nothing. Muzzled.
I was totally muzzled. 100%. I think I was, so my conditions were or are I have no contact orders with Chris and Pat and, you know, some of the other organizers. The one with Chris has been dropped. Still? No, the one with Chris has been dropped. The rest of them are all still in place. So there's that. I was barred off social media until last December. I'm still not allowed to. I have to be very careful about what I post. So I kind of come up with some creative ways to post about things, but I'm not allowed to post. Actually, when they redid my condition, it read, she is not to post about the Freedom Convoy or cause anyone else to post or cause others to post about the Freedom Convoy. And I remember saying to one of my lawyers when he told me that, I was like, well, Eric, I mean, just by me being back on social media is going to cause people to post about the Freedom Convoy. You know what I mean? So they intentionally made all these conditions very broad. And I have to reside at my address in Medicine Hat. My surety still has to check my devices, like all my electronic devices, to make sure that I'm not violating any of my no contact orders. So yeah, I mean, that's the thing. It's been 3 years of these conditions, and I've not even been charged with a crime.
Right. And you're still waiting. So this is the thing, is like, we were going to do this podcast a couple weeks ago, and you were supposed to have...
I was supposed to be leaving.
You're supposed to be leaving, and you're supposed to actually have some information on whether you're, like, what the charges, if there's charges and what they'll be. But that got also... Delayed.
Yeah.
And so you're still waiting.
Yeah. April 3rd is the new date 3rd. Now. So,
okay.
Yeah.
And so that is the Crown is charging you? Can you explain
that'll be the
happening?
verdict. That'll be the verdict. So I have 6 charges against me. Chris has the same 6 charges against him. And then they laid an additional charge against Chris. And so I feel pretty good about my chances. Like, I feel pretty confident. All the evidence that I saw throughout our trial that was presented was good for me. I mean, It was all videos of me advocating to respect the law and respect the police officers. And, you know, we were here to protest peacefully and be kind to others, you know, watch each other's back kind of thing. They brought in numerous witnesses for my trial, and not a single one of them had ever even had an interaction with me. So, you know, I feel good. I feel pretty good about it. I mean, I guess knowing the judicial system in Canada right now, but who knows? I don't know. I don't know what to expect, but I mean, I'm optimistic. I don't have any anxiety over it. I mean, one of the things, I've always been a very spiritual person, and one of the things that was so glaringly obvious to me during the convoy was that it was such a spiritual experience. Things just showed up when we needed them. People just showed up when we needed them. Like, there was things that happened in Ottawa that give me goosebumps even just thinking about, you know, like, so I feel, and I always felt like we were guided and we were protected. And I feel that same way now. And when they arrested me in Ottawa, I just thought, okay, God, you're not done with me yet. I guess we have more exposing to do. Right. So,
and do you still feel that way?
I do.
Yeah,
I do. Yeah.
So there's a sense of like a destiny here.
Yeah. I do. Which looking back, of course, hindsight's 2020. But when I look back at my life now, the experiences that I've had, the jobs that I've had, have all culminated to this. You know, like a prime example is me being in the Maverick Party. I learned so much from being on that board and all the different positions. Like, and we made a federal political party, right? We created it from nothing. And and it was because of that experience that I you know, as soon as we started to get our social media got insanely busy, all this money started coming in. So I knew we needed committees because I couldn't do it by myself. So when we needed help, so I formed the finance committee for the money, for the donations. I formed a social media committee to help with social media and stuff like that. So that experience really benefited the organizational process. And then, of course, my background in logistics and organization too, right? So yeah, it's almost like it was meant to be.
Well, and you even speak of like, you know, you not really even, like, obviously there was many organizers or like a few organizers, but then just you actually being the one that ended up being asked to be doing the speaking, and how that was actually quite organic over the whole experience, that it wasn't like, hey, you were like running for the limelight, or that you were thinking that this was going to be the position that you were in. It just happened. And even as I say that, I get goosebumps. Yes. It was just like, this is the role that you...
Nobody else wanted to. And it's funny because, and I didn't want to either. Like, I'm not comfortable doing videos and stuff. And I even said that when I very first started, but once the donations started coming in, it became very important to me that everyone that was supporting us kind of was a part of it, a part of the process. Right. And I think I even said that, like, you guys, this is not who I am. I'm not the person that goes on and does Facebook Live videos. But I think, I mean, that's part of the reason, you know, people were familiar with me and Chris, because we were doing a lot of those videos. And then, yeah, like you said, when we went to do that first press conference, they volunteered me to do it. And there's one of the spiritual things I was telling you about, and I write about it in my book, because I remember we'd had a couple of smaller press conferences by then, but it was like invite only media, right? And so this was our first big press conference, you know, with the CBC and the CTV and Global, and I remember getting ready to walk in, and I was thinking, I consciously noticed that I wasn't afraid, and I didn't feel anxiety or apprehensive. Like, walking in there, I felt at peace, and that it was just going to be fine. Like, and I recognized immediately that was, you know, that was my guide, or my God. Yeah. You know, he had my back, and I acknowledge that for sure.
It's interesting to have those experiences where you become like the vessel, like, and that's the best way that I can explain it. It's like where all of a sudden it's like it's like coming through you. There's a sense of ease, and there's just like the ego's like to the side, and it's just like, boom, you're in flow. You're just like, you know, they talk about flow state being an actual thing. But when I read that part in the book, I was like, I know exactly, you know, I've had experiences like that, even as a performer, and even in the therapy room, where there's this other thing that happens, and there's like a deep groundedness, and there's like this knowing that this is exactly what needs to happen at this moment, and you are just like at service to this thing that's coming through you. Yeah.
And one thing I've noticed is that I'm always still going to go to bed at night, right? Like, no matter what challenge is coming up, at the end of the day, I'm still going to put on my pajamas, and I'm going to crawl into bed and go to sleep. And tomorrow we'll start again. I mean, that's what got me through every cross-examination, every bail hearing. Like, I mean, it's intimidating being in leg shackles and sitting in a prisoner's box and being, you know, questioned by somebody that's extremely volatile, right? I mean, and aggressive. I mean, as you read in my book, I mean, the Crown prosecutor that we had at that point is an emotional train wreck as far as I'm concerned. Like, and he's Pat King's prosecutor too. So if you're following Pat's case, he was just sentenced, right? So
who's Pat? Who's that?
Pat King was one of the other organizers. Okay. And so his trial, ironically, started in November, and it's already over. 4 months has lasted, whereas Chris and I think we're going on to 19 months now. Okay. Anyways, so they just at the last hour appealed his acquittal on one of his convictions and his sentencing. This Crown prosecutor feels that we should all be in jail for a minimum of 10 years.
For inciting violence? Is that one of the charges?
No, there's no one that was charged with inciting violence. Our charges pretty much all stem around mischief or intimidation, or I think Chris has got a disobey a court order.
Okay.
So yeah,
It's mischief.
Nobody was charged with sedition. Nobody was charged with treason. Nobody was charged with any violent crimes. Like the best they could do. My original charge wasn't even mischief. When I was initially arrested, I was charged with, get this, counseling others to commit the offense of mischief which did not occur. So think about that. My charge was counseling others to commit mischief, but the mischief never happened. Right? They added 5 more charges later, though, because I think they were just throwing anything at us.
Just to basically get you arrested and to like de-escalate the movement.
Yes.
But then this like 19-month long trial. Well, like, what do you think that's about? Why do you think it's dragging out so much?
Well, I think lawfare is a very real thing in Canada right now, and I think the objective of lawfare is to demoralize and bankrupt you, basically.
What's lawfare? What do you mean?
It is using the judiciary system as a tactic to, demoralize and bankrupt you.
I see. Okay.
Right. So again, I mean, this is dragged out for 3 years. So I've been under these conditions for 3 years.
And you guys are funding
Our trial was supposed to be 16 days.
Wow.
It was supposed to start in early September of 2023, and it was supposed to be over by the middle of October.
And so how are you affording all of this? Are you being...
Well, thankfully I wrote a book. I mean, it's definitely not making me rich, but I'm getting a little bit of income off of that. Thankfully, Ezra Levent did a fundraiser, or not a fundraiser, but he crowdfunded for me so that to cover some of my expenses to go out there.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's very difficult to find a job right now.
Yeah.
I've tried, and it's not that people don't like me. It's just that, number one, I still have this hanging over my head. So who's going to train me up on the off chance? That's a big investment in case I get sentenced and have to go to jail. Right. Which it's a possibility, right? I mean, all options are going to be on the table here. So I have to be ready for anything. Or it's just my name recognition is too much. Like, so I don't know what I'm going to do. I honestly don't know what I'm going to do. But
I sense you have a deep trust, though. Like,
I do. I really do. I know. I do have a couple of options I think I could do right now, but there's just not great fits. And I do believe that the right fit will come, and I'll know it when I see it.
Yeah. So. But even this like cost of having to deal with this trial for 19 months, and you guys, obviously you got crowdfunded for some of it, the support, but like all the travel and the lawyers. And I mean, again, I just come back to like, we should have the right to organize, and people wanted to organize with you. Yeah. And it was not in line with what the government was trying to, tell us.
It didn't match their objectives.
It did not match the objectives. Yeah. And just like seeing the treatment of you and Chris and this movement is deeply disturbing, even if you don't agree with it. Personally, I'll say I believe in the ability to have choice and autonomy. And I didn't get vaccinated. I was a pregnant woman at the time, and I was breastfeeding afterwards, and I refused to vaccinate for those reasons. And I didn't want to tell anybody that because of the way that people were talking about people that didn't vaccinate. And I also, as a therapist, it was deeply in touch with the impacts of the lockdowns and the impacts of all of the mandates and the polarization and the judgment against people who wanted to have autonomy over their body and wanted to wait and see more information about the vaccine, or wanted to ride it out and didn't feel like they were at a risk. And I agree. I mean, so many people were so horribly impacted mental health wise and financially from the lockdowns. And you know what? If it was worth it because it was actually doing something, okay, that's one thing. But it wasn't. Yeah. I mean, it really, at the point in which the Freedom Convoy started, it was time for things to start moving and things to shift. And maybe in the beginning it was necessary for a period of time, but there came a point where it was like, the government's not shifting or adapting to what needs to happen right now to be in, actual service to our economy and our people.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and the ridiculousness of it all. I mean, everything, all the data is coming out supporting like no lockdowns, none of it, right? I mean, the harms to mental health alone. I can't tell you, and I wrote about that in my book too, but I mean, every single day that we came across Canada, and I still hear it very often to this day, we met people that were planning their suicides. Or we met people who had already lost somebody to suicide. You know, and so that was very heavy. Bern Buchert, one of the truckers that was there he's from Fort St. John, put it very nicely. He called it, we were carrying the burden of hope. Right?
Yeah.
And like I said, I was never really an emotional person before this happened. But I mean, I cried more in those 3 weeks and not from, you know, for myself.
Yeah.
But just because the stories that I heard and the people that I talked to, but even behind all of those stories, and some of them are really terrible stories that these people have been through, there was still that resilience and that strength and like that Canada, you know what I mean? And it was just so brilliant, like so not brilliant, beautiful.
Beautiful.
It was just so beautiful to have that experience, and I've always very much enjoyed positions where I could help people. You know, like I was a personal trainer for a long time in fitness, and that was one of the most gratifying things I've ever done, because not just physically do you get to see people change, but you get to see this confidence come back, right? You get to see this kind of shift in the mentality. That's why I love fitness so much. I mean, of course, who doesn't like to feel strong? But it's the mental aspect of it. And so that was a real gift for me to work with people and be able to see that change and be a part of it, you know?
Yeah. And then, you know, just thinking about how that role shifted into like a different way to see the change. Yeah. And so at some point during the convoy, you quit the Maverick Party.
I did,
Party.
yes.
Yeah.
The Tuesday after we got in.
Yeah. So I think that's just so interesting too. Like after, you know, you said that like resiliency in the Canada, like seeing Canada from this new perspective and the opening, you know, in your heart as you were traveling across the country and in connection with people and their stories. And yeah.
Well, and one of the reasons I left was the Quebecois, right? Like, I remember sitting at my desk, or I wasn't at my desk. We'd all been sent home because it was Omicron, I think, right? So, but I had my workstation set up at home, and I remember in our chat, one of the Quebec road captains is like, "There's 1,000 trucks. We got 1,000 trucks ready to go," and I was like, "Holy cow!"
From Quebec.
From Quebec, like we had so much support from Quebec, and to me, that was like a real eye opener. You know, because all we hear about, especially in Alberta, because of our industry in particular and the politics surrounding that, it's always been East versus West, or, you know, or at least that's what we've all been led to believe. And that was like one of the first epiphanies I had, was that it's all been a lie. And especially now that I met them, and well, we stayed in Quebec when we went out for trial. We stayed there for the first month and a half of it. Yeah. So, I mean, and rural Quebec is actually more conservative, I dare say, than rural Alberta. Right. You know, so, but the whole experience just made me realize that there's so many people, we're maybe just not as vocal, but we have a lot of the same beliefs. We want to see this country succeed. I used to be the most vocal, you know, when they would talk about the French language, I would just think that was the biggest waste of taxpayer money, blah, 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 blah. But once I got there and I met them and I had this experience, I realized it's a part of their culture.
Yeah.
It is who they are. And so I think it's important that we do preserve that culture and we do encourage that culture. I've got no problem with bilingualism. I think it should be celebrated now, you know. So there's things like that happen that were some eye-opening moments, but I love Quebec. I have had some great experiences there. I met some wonderful people from there, and there was just a ton of support. And I mean, they were, in my opinion, the hardest hit province during the lockdowns, right? They had curfews, and some places you couldn't go get groceries if you didn't have your papers. Like it was, well, they were going to tax. Remember, they were going to tax the unvaxxed. Yeah. So, I mean, they had all these really punitive measures in place for them.
You know, it's so I mean, I think it speaks so much to your character. You know, you're even talking about it now of your ability to open and change your perspective on things, and to like, you know, oh, I used to think it was a waste of taxpayer dollars, and now, you know, the French language, and I'm like, oh yeah, okay, it really is part of the culture. And it's like, speaks to this process of humanity of like when we meet, like when we can actually come in contact. It's like, I heard a quote on a, I can't remember where it came from right now, but to know someone, to love something or someone is to know it. Mm-hmm. And so if we don't actually know each other in some way, how do we actually understand and like love yes. each other, you know? And so you can be like, yeah, you know, French, I'm just using this example, but like, why waste on the bilingualism? And then you like are immersed in the culture and the people, and you're like, oh shit, I get it. Okay, right. Open. I'm opening because we're in contact, and now I understand. And you know, as you moved, that was one of the things that really stood out to me. It's like, as you moved across Canada, you as an individual were just like opening and opening and seeing and like growing, and like that's actually what's necessary at this yes. time, you know, is for us. Like I really believe that there's a need for differing opinions and for people to actually hold like a message and an opinion about something, and then another person maybe to hold the opposite. So then like it might be actually necessary,
right? Yeah.
To like actually have all of the like perspectives to be held at the table. Like that's how it works. You know?
Well, that's also how you solve problems.
Yes, absolutely.
I mean, from coming from all different perspectives, right?
That's
I mean,
right.
So I agree. I mean, our own beliefs, personal beliefs, and thoughts and opinions make us who we are. And I think if we all were all the same, this would be the most boring planet, you know, in the universe. But yeah. So it's important that we have these differing opinions. Like, yes. But you know, like it's like I said earlier, we just have to find our common ground.
Okay. Yes.
Right. That's
yes.
it. That's all. We just have to find our common ground and understand that it's okay for other people to think differently.
Right.
And honestly, you know, especially in the social media sphere, like I get death threats, I get hate messages. Every day my inboxes are full of this crap. But I mean, this is stuff that these people would never say to my face. I maybe 0.5% of them might actually come up and say it to my face. Yeah. But people just they don't interact like that in real life, you know? So they get behind a keyboard and they think that they're being tough. And, but again, I mean, I'm not a bad person. And I think 10% of the population is not going to like you just because. That's what my dad always told me. Yeah. Don't worry about pleasing people, because you can't please. Some of them are just going to hate you just because, and that's okay. And so I don't let that stuff bother me really. Obviously,
it takes a very
it depends on my emotional state, I think, in the day, right? Like if I'm having a bad day and I look at it, I might be like, oh, well, that's not very nice, but most of the time I just ignore it anyways.
I mean, so it takes a really special kind of person to move through this. You know, like, you know, you're like, yeah, I get death threats every day. And, you know, you're on the phone with a lawyer. Yeah. You say as you're driving here, you know, you know you're going to be facing trial and like, you know, like all this legal stuff. And yet you're so grounded. And I mean, that's my experience of you right now. And and so like, how do you think that is? Like, are you just one badass bitch that's just like... like, fuck it, here I go. Like what? Like, how do you get refined?
Sometimes I am.
Yeah. Like, how do you get refined in this way? You know, it's like, and because as I shared, I've been on the firing line in a smaller way. And like, it takes some serious fucking conviction to stand in the place that you're standing right now, and to continue to move forward with a deep trust in your purpose. Yeah.
Well, again, part of it is because I consider myself to be very spiritual, and I do believe that someone's looking out for me. Excuse me, and us. And I think like just life experiences, right? I mean, I'm not perfect. I've made a lot of terrible choices. I've made a lot of good choices too, but every terrible choice that I made and then dealing with the outcome of it, I've learned lessons from. And so like, I don't look at a lot of this as it's a challenge, but is it the end of the world? No. You know, I'm still going to go to bed tonight.
Right. That's what you said earlier.
You know what I mean?
And
so
do you think that you have a capacity to make this not as personal? Like that this is not just about you? Like that there's this.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
This was never about me. Like ever about me. And it was funny when we were talking earlier, like I remember when I was doing all the public speaking, when we were doing that there, like I was always, insistent that we have like all the truckers or organizers, that we were always presented as a group, even if it was just me speaking, but I always wanted them there with me, right? Because it wasn't about me. And it was funny because even when I did the presser with Brian Peckford, I haven't had enough coffee yet.
That's okay.
So when we did the presser with Brian Peckford, and I even mentioned to him, I said, well, can we get the truckers like behind us standing there? And he's like, nope, it's got to be a simple message and we're just going to stay on message. And then we just got to keep it super simple. And so he and I did that press conference. But I mean, it was never about me. Even now, it's still not about me.
Right. But so that's the glory for sure. I can hear the humility and the glory, and the attention isn't about you. But it also seems that you're able to apply that to even the attack and even the hatred and the
because it's not a reflection on me.
That's what I'm saying.
It's a reflection on them.
That's right.
Like, and I will make that comment sometimes on some comments. For the most part, I just ignore them. But, I mean, if you want to call me a Nazi, or you want to call me a terrorist or a domestic terrorist, or you wish I would go to jail, you hope I go to jail. If you hope I go to jail, then I'm worried for you. Because what you're advocating for then is that we can just throw anyone in prison just because we don't like the way they think.
Yeah.
That's, to me, is scary. But again, that's a reflection on you. What other people think of me does not define who I am. And I know who I am, and that's why I don't have any anxiety about this. Whether I'm found guilty or I'm found innocent, I went there with the best intentions. I went there to help my fellow countrymen against what I perceived was tyrannical overreach. And I was just tired of seeing people hurting, right? So... And even when I was there, I didn't do anything illegal. I was constantly, that's why I made so many videos, was to make sure that this narrative that they were painting was going to be countered, I would even say, if you're joining us and your intention is to be a jerk, basically, or you think you're going to intimidate people or threaten people or be aggressive, then don't, you're not with us. That's not what we're about. Mm-hmm. So I mean, everyone's entitled to their opinion. And my dad always said, what someone thinks of you is none of your business.
Yeah.
So words to live by.
Yeah. And I mean, and you hold that. I can see that you carry that, and that there's a bigger thing happening here where you're a mouthpiece for the collective, that this isn't really about you specifically, that there's something else happening here that you are an advocate for. And so you keep saying that we need to come back to common ground. And so in the convoy, the common ground was freedom. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Well, even more than that, I think it was humanity.
Yeah.
Even more than that, I think it was just everyone wanted to just be able to connect again. We're human beings, right? We need that interaction.
Yeah. We did. We do. Yeah.
And I don't think it's impossible to do. I think we can find that common ground again. And the big thing is people just have to turn off their legacy media, right? I mean, one of the things that I find the most frustrating and the most saddening, actually, is the entire last 10 years, and maybe longer. I mean, I've been paying more attention to politics, say, in the last decade than I have, I just got into it probably in the mid-90s, or started paying attention to it. And that is, forgot my train of thought.
The legacy media.
Oh, and that is...
the saddest thing.
I mean, we have a government that just tries to divide people, divide and conquer, right? Like, I mean, there's labels for everything. You're left, you're right, you're gay, you're straight, you're black, you're white, you're vax, you're anti-vax, you're a Trump supporter, or you're like a Maple MAGA, or like, it's constantly using all these labels to divide people. And we just have to stop listening to that. Just like my experience with the Québécois.
Yeah.
Right. I had this epiphany and I was like, none of this is true. Like, we're being fed a bunch of garbage.
Okay. So, you know what I'm going to even say, take it a step further, is like, you know, our government is a reflection of our own inner division. So we are all, like, many of us are obsessed with the organization and the categorization of all of the parts of ourselves, and that there's there's things about ourselves, our shadow, that we're not willing or wanting to see. You know, and so when we do that, we shove that part down, it actually shows up outside of us. And so this thing that's happening right now, this tyrant versus me, like, you know, the other being the tyrant, the other being, you know, not me at all, is actually like, and you can see this when you stand outside, is like, you know, if we're going to look at both sides are tyrants.
Yes.
Everybody's being a tyrant. Like, this is the issue.
Yeah.
It's like, you know, it's like, you're so left, you're right now.
Yeah.
And you're so, you know, like, anyways, but so this is actually a reflection of the inner process of us. And so we can even blame the government, but we have to understand that we are actually caught in a place where we are divided and polarized within ourselves, that we are lacking the ability to be with nuance. We are lacking the ability to integrate that which is uncomfortable. We're lacking the ability to be with parts of ourselves that we don't like. And so we are pushing those parts down and trying to be, you know, pure in whatever fucking version of pure you think that you need to be. And anything outside of that is wrong or not okay. And then that is what's reflected out in our world, where we have people who are morally pure judging those who are not as pure as them.
Well, we have people crying for unity that are creating division. We have people crying for tolerance while being intolerant, and we have people bullying people into not being bullies.
Right.
I mean, this is where we're at now, and it's crazy. Like, it's crazy. And like you were just saying, and even to go back to, you know, your experience at the university, you know, Eva Chipiuk very nicely explained this, and the hatred and the anger. People are angry, and they need something to be angry about, right? Or they need something to focus that anger on. And so in my case, for example, with the convoy, like, Canadians were pissed off after all the stuff with the government. They're mad because of lockdowns. They're mad because people aren't getting vaccinated, blah, 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 blah. But you can't be mad. Like, Justin Trudeau is not going to sit down and listen to you, or whoever's creating the problem. And so, but here's Chris and Tamara Lich, two of the organizers from the convoy. You know, we're just going to hate on them and just direct all of our anger at them. Like, and it's misplaced, just like yours was misplaced.
Yeah.
Right. Like, people are just so angry, but I mean, they can't go to the university and be angry. Right. So then they take it out on you.
Right. Well, and here's the thing. I think that things are really not good right now, you know, and I think that that people need to actually come into an embodied experience that things are not okay, you know, and we can blame that, whatever that is, that's the reason why it's not okay. Trump, or the oil sands, or climate change, or like fascism, or whatever. Like, you know what? There's many things that are actually a problem right now, and things are not looking very good. And the first thing that we need to do is actually look at ourselves.
Agreed.
Of, like,
you have to clean off your own doorstep. I am a huge advocate for that.
And how are you being, you know, it's like when we're so upset about, Trump is a great thing right now because everyone's upset for some reason, and that this is the new thing, right? The new machine.
It's a distraction.
It's a distraction, yeah. And it's fear, and it's polarization.
And it's another division tactic.
That's right. And so, you know, you can look at that and be upset about, you know, like, him being a tyrant and all of these policies and stuff he's putting in that are horrific. But it's like, okay, but how do you treat in your life? How are you treating your neighbor based on how they're living their life, or what they think? How are you treating your children? How are you treating your partner? How are you treating yourself? How are you treating yourself? You know, and like, why are you upset? But this is where I come to. It's like, why are you so miserable right now? Why are you so in pain? And maybe if you can go there, then you can start to understand what it is in this life that isn't okay for you. And then maybe at that point we can start creating change from the place of self-understanding.
People don't want to go there though. Like a large portion of the people are just so passive and lazy in some cases, right? I mean, anyone can go out and find out all this information, you know, like I'll post something about something that came out at the POEC and people are like, I didn't even know that. Well, it's all out there in the public domain. But I mean, even more so than that, I think in some cases it's so much easier to just not look in the mirror, blame everybody else for your problems and wait for somebody else to come and fix it. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because there's an effort. Like I've done so much self-help through the years you can't even imagine. And I mean, it was difficult, right? But I mean, I had to recognize that things needed to be changed and I needed to change and grow in different ways. And so I had to do something about it, you know? But I think a lot of people are afraid to look inward.
And some people aren't equipped, I will say too.
Yes, that's right. You're right. Some people aren't.
Some people are not equipped, and some people, that's not their journey. That's not their destiny to actually do that deep work. But I would say, you know, on the smallest level, on the like basic level, what you're saying, it's like all this anger that's coming up, you know, and when we find the thing to project it onto, the person to like take the anger, it's like the first thing we have to ask ourselves is like, what am I really angry about?
Right, yeah.
And what is this about? And to understand versus just feeling so like there's like very big experience of powerlessness that everybody's experiencing. That's no matter what side you're on, you know, a feeling like we're powerless, and it's like, okay, well, how are we gonna move? How do we move through that?
Yeah, exactly.
You know? Versus like blaming and then having a savior, because that's kind of what we're in. We're in the blame and the savior.
Well, it's the drama triangle, right?
Yes,
the rescuer, the victim, the rescuer, and the
victim, the rescuer, and the bully. But what's the name
basically,
of it? Perpetrator,
right? And that's the cycle that's what we're in.
Yes,
and it's so obvious now, especially watching what's going on, like with the Liberals now going into this election. You know, they're breaking their arms, patting themselves on the back for making all these changes to the policies that they created and implemented.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, like it's like I'm living in upside down clown town.
Yeah.
And but it is. We're like in that drama triangle, and it's just this constant cycle of being, you know, the victim and then being rescued, and then, you know, it just never ends.
So what do you think is the solution from that? You know.
Well, number one, I really like what you said. I firmly believe that every Canadian needs to really take a look inside themselves and see, you know, how they can be a better human being, or, you know, feel more fulfilled, and that, because I believe that you know, a strong person builds a strong family, which builds a strong house, which builds a strong community, which builds a strong country. Yeah. And so, like you said, we can't have a strong country until we take a good hard look in the mirror, individually and collectively. Mm-hmm. The reason that we're in this situation is our own fault. And my theory on that is that after the wars, Canada had a great reputation. Like, you know, we were seen as survivalists, very strong and resilient, and we had a great reputation after that. And then it's like, I feel like we just rode the coattails of this reputation, right? And instead of trying to foster it to continue, and we got complacent. And I mean, politics used to make my eyes glaze over. I totally get why people don't want to be involved, but we stopped being involved and we stopped caring and thinking that, you know, just trusting that these politicians have our best interests at heart.
Yeah.
But they don't.
No.
They're there with their own best interests at heart. And so we got to start individually, but also collectively, and then, you know, just take a good hard look in the mirror and stop waiting for somebody else to come and fix the problem. And that doesn't mean that you're going to go out and start a convoy, but that could be something so simple as joining your local school board. Yeah. Just get involved in some way. Like, everybody has a passion or, you know, something that they want to do that interests them. So find that's meaningful, find what's meaningful for you, and devote some time to it.
Yeah.
whether that's, sitting on your local council or, like I said, a school board or a police board council, anything like that. I mean, that's how we make these changes. But I mean, lots of people don't want to put in the effort. A lot of people are busy raising families, which I get. I mean, especially right now. I mean, I go shopping for 2 people. I can't imagine trying to raise a family right now. Yeah. Because I can't walk out of a grocery store with under $200, right? So, and it's not like I eat a ton, But so, I mean, I think it can be done. I think we can make these changes, but I think we need to come back together with our compassion and find our humanity, focus on the positives and not the negatives, and get involved.
So what do you think are some of the common ground? Like, okay, so we can talk about politics because we're in a really challenging political dynamic right now. Yeah. And there's an election coming up, and maybe this will be released before the election. We'll see, depending on what happens with your verdict. But we can talk. It is a distraction, and we talked about that. Yes. And yet there is we still have to vote. And so how do you think we deal with this piece? Because I agree with you. There's the communal, the community-based stuff, the regionally based stuff of where you can make an actual difference. And yet we still have this national schmozzle that we're in. And
that's a nice way to put it.
And I'll say too, you said in the book, the Freedom Convoy also wasn't a political thing. There actually wasn't a political party involved. And so I don't actually know your political perspective. And so I guess I'm curious what your thoughts are right now.
I feel politically homeless. Yeah. Right now, honestly.
You and many people. I also feel politically homeless.
I obviously am not an NDP supporter. I mean, I've always liked Pierre Poilievre because I find him to be intelligent. He's very articulate. He's very good at making the Liberals, when the House was in session. He can completely obliterate them in question period. He comes off, in my opinion, sounding intelligent, and they come off looking like idiots. But I mean, I think he's dropped the ball on a few things, and I guess we'll see what happens in the next few weeks. I'm clearly not a Liberal supporter. Mm-hmm. And, I've met Maxime Bernier a few times, and I like Maxime Bernier. But, I mean, it's a PPC is just... I mean, a lot of people say that him not even having a seat is not a reason to not vote for him. But, I mean, the guy's been through 3 elections now and still hasn't won a seat. So... So I hope Pierre wins. I don't think it's the solution, but I think it'll buy us some time.
Right.
Right. And I hope I'm wrong. I hope that I'm 100% wrong and that he is going to do all the things that he says. But again, it's not just him. It's the party. Right. Yeah. And that's the thing. We're not just talking about one man. And what I've seen out of the Conservative Party in the last few years, especially when it comes to elections, is that they seem to come out of the gate and they do real well, just like they just did. And then something happens or they change, and then they just drop out. Mm-hmm. Like the last 2, it's almost, I'm not saying this happened, but it's almost like they just threw it because they were doing so well. Aaron O'Toole was running, and then the one before that was Scheer. Yeah, Scheer. And it's just like they were both doing really well. And then the bottom just dropped out, and then look what happened. Yeah. So...
But there's what I'm hearing in all of this is that's your buy time.
I'm not right. I'm not far right. I'm not left. I'm all of those things. Yeah. And I think most Canadians are. Right. A little bit of everything.
So then and I agree. I mean, I think there's probably many people listening that feel politically homeless. I feel politically homeless, even though at one point I used to be I had a very strong political home and that shifted.
Yes.
In time.
Me too.
Yeah. And yet, so there's this need to, there's a different way, there's something else that's required other than this left-right political. And so what do you think that is? Is it finding common ground? Is it a new political party? Is it more involvement?
Well, I mean, I tell you, I'd like to turn on the question period and see 2 sides of the House sitting at a table trying to solve problems than behave like school children. Right. Well, school children are more mature than what I see happening there. Yeah. So, I mean, that's what has to change. I mean, we need, like I said, we need a lot of changes to the way things are done. and a lot of safety measures that protect Canadians, not politicians, put in place. And until we see that, I mean, I think we're just going to continue to have what they call just a uniparty.
So what are some of those safety measures? Well,
like I said, we need to have some kind of recall legislation in place so that if we have a prime minister that's completely destroying the country, we have methods to get rid of him.
Other than the Governor
checks
General?
And balance. Pardon me?
Other than the Governor General proroguing, or
yes,
right?
Yes,
yeah.
And that the Governor General position itself. I mean, we've sat here for 10 years with the majority of Canadians, especially I would say in the last 5, that wanted an election.
Yeah.
I mean, and this woman could have went out at any time and listened to Canadians, but she doesn't. She's too busy dyeing her hair blue and buying expensive wardrobes.
Right.
So,
Which was
I mean,
also in the news.
You know, there's a lot of things like that have to change. So you have to remember that, like, when our Constitution was created, that was 150 some years ago now. So things have changed, right? And it was also set up based on the British model. Yeah. And we didn't have lords and ladies in Canada then, right?
Right.
So a lot of that stuff I think has to change. Even when it comes to spending money, like, we should have more of a say, I mean, in where our money is going. You know, so there's just a lack of transparency. Like, we need to have measures in place where you can't redact documents just to save your own ass.
Yeah.
If it's a case of national security, I get it. But if it's just to cover your own ass, then, you know, you shouldn't be able to redact documents. That's information that Canadians need to have. So I think there's a lot of changes that we have to see happen. The problem is that the system is also designed to set up so that it's really hard to make those changes.
Yeah.
Right? Like, even for Alberta, say, if they wanted to have a referendum on separation, or they wanted to separate, I mean, that's just like a nightmare, an absolute nightmare. So, I mean, there's just a lot of bureaucracy and red tape and a lot of needless time wasting, money wasting things that we can do away with and be more efficient, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that sounds like a whole other advocacy project.
Totally. Right. I know. This is what I'm saying. I don't know what I'm going to do. I mean, I have a lot of people that ask if I'm going to get into politics, and I don't want to be a politician.
Yeah.
I'm not politically correct enough, because sometimes I just tend to say what I think, and I don't sugarcoat things, and like, I try to tell it like it is, right? I'm not.
Right. You seem like maybe one who's better at holding the fire to the politician's ass versus
exactly.
like being the politician.
Like, so
you know?
I don't know, like, you like an advocate of something, I don't know,
Mm-hmm.
charter advocate or something.
Yeah,
like I said, I'll know it when I see it.
It's coming.
Yeah,
it's going to become clearer. But you're right. You know, there's some things in our system that are very archaic, and there's some deep concerns around the way things have gone, and the freedom and the rights that we have as people, and the lack of conversation, and the media having such a strong hold on people, and the inability to organize and protest without being considered illegal.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, there's this piece that, like, the community, I mean, it's another hallway to go down, but it's like, we shouldn't have to use the law to stop protesting. I mean, that's what, like, people's opinions are for. It's like, we're supposed to check each other. Like, that's part of being in community. It's like, we're supposed to check each other, and not that, like, yeah. And we're so scared to do that now. It's like, someone doesn't want to come up to you and be like, hey, I don't agree with face to face. Hey,
right.
I don't agree with the Freedom Convoy. I feel like that was like a huge nuisance. And like, how dare you guys organize downtown Ottawa for so long and disrupt so many people?
Yeah.
It's like, do people even want to have that conversation with you?
No. Well, and that's the thing. I mean, it depends on what the protest is, right? Black Lives Matter went down there during the middle of the pandemic, and apparently that was okay. It just depends on. It is scary. What's scary is that you have a government that thinks it's okay to intimidate people, and that's what's funny is I'm the one being charged with intimidation, but what they're doing to me and Chris is intimidation. Mm-hmm. It's to intimidate the rest of y'all from just keeping your mouth shut and going to work and just
right.
Nothing to see here. That's what it was all about, and so. That's why I believe the decision in our case is so important. It's not even about me and Chris. right? This is, I mean, it's going to obviously directly affect us, but it's going to directly affect 40 million Canadians,
Right.
the outcome of this trial. And that's why I think it's so important that, that we do, hopefully get found not guilty. And not only that, but that the government gets held to account for what they did.
Yeah.
As far, Justice Mosley found the invocation was unlawful and unconstitutional.
The what?
The Mosley decision.
So can you explain that for listeners?
Sure. Okay. So after the invocation of the Emergencies Act, some civil liberties organizations got together and took it before a judge, Justice Mosley, and he deemed his ruling on it was that it was unconstitutional. The invocation of the Emergencies Act was unconstitutional, unlawful, and he used another word that I thought was quite funny. But it basically, I can't remember what it was. Anyway, so within minutes of his decision coming out, Chrystia Freeland went on and said they were going to appeal that decision. And there's no possible way they could have read that judgment that quickly. But of course they had to, because if they don't appeal it, then they're basically admitting guilt.
And that's the government that's going to appeal it?
Yes, that's the government.
Yeah.
So actually in February, I listened to the hearings. They just had them the 14th and 15th, I think it was, of February. And the appeal. So now the judge is going to decide if the appeal is going to be heard or not. Mm. So, I mean, and that's a very important case, right? The outcome of that. But after that, I think people just want to see some accountability. It wasn't a national emergency. I mean, the thing about Ottawa, this is the thing about Ottawa, because I get this all the time too. You took a whole city hostage. I'm like, a whole city. We were a few city blocks downtown. And literally, because I had to drive out of the area often, as soon as you left the red zone, they called it, it was like business as usual. You wouldn't have even known that there was anything going on downtown. You wouldn't have even known it. Yeah. So, I mean, we didn't take a whole city hostage.
It's a pretty extreme response. And I think that people have to really sit with that. It's that's the National Emergencies Act because of a group of protesters in the downtown Ottawa with trucks that are honking. Okay, let's go the extreme. There's like honking trucks nonstop. People that might have political views that are, unsavory and people think is dangerous, but there's no violence happening and they're hanging out. That's not actually the case, but we're just having a thought experiment here. The Emergencies Act for the whole country, that to me, it's there's something going on here that's bigger than what people are seeing. It's that is such a strong response to a group of people trying to speak out against the government's mandates. That speaks
to authoritarianism.
Yeah. If that's scary. Totalitarianism.
Right.
It's scary. Yeah. And also that it's hilarious. I'm sorry. And I know that you're facing possibly 10 years in jail, but to think that you really pissed them off that much, wow, well done. You really got in there. You guys really fucked them up.
Oh my gosh.
They responded so intensely. It's just
the day I met Keith Wilson was the day that the lawyers flew into Ottawa. And this is one of the first times I'd ever met this lawyer, right? And we're walking down the hallway. And he's and he didn't know me then very well either. So he was, erring on the side of caution. But he's like, Miss Lich, he said, I don't want to offend you. But he said, my goal here is that every morning that Justin Trudeau wakes up, I want his first thought to be, what's that little bitch going to do to me today? And I'm like, awesome. I'm like, take my money. Right? So anyways, yeah. So obviously we hit it off right from then and there. I was like, yeah. And I
so
think
who was
he succeeded. He's one of the lawyers that flew in.
I see.
He's representing us on some of our cases. Yeah. And so, yeah. But I just thought that was super funny.
Just being a nuisance, really. It's and that's really basically what you guys were, was a nuisance. And to be... And I mean, with a political, not even an agenda, not even a political, a moral agenda.
It was a moral agenda. You're right.
Yeah, it was a moral agenda. And you were being a nuisance, but it's to be a nuisance and have that response, it's there's a fear there.
Just think about it for a second, because I hear this all the time too. So yeah, okay, so some people might have thought it was a nuisance, but what had we just gone through?
Yeah.
losing your job wasn't a nuisance. Having your family split up and never want to talk to you again because you were unvaccinated wasn't a nuisance. Killing yourself wasn't a nuisance. Your dying mother, not being able to see her wasn't a nuisance. You know what I mean? So, and one of the things I was really happy about with our trial is that, because nobody ever acknowledges that, right? It's all about the trial, or even at the POEC. Very, very few times was it ever recognized why we went. Right.
It's just that you were a problem, basically.
Yeah. I was really happy to hear the judge one day, reference something about like what had happened, like the COVID, the pandemic, and stuff like that. So she understands the context at least, right? But I mean, so many people were like, "Oh, it was 3 weeks of this and that," and I'm like, "Are you kidding me? 3 weeks of this and that?" Like the stories that I've heard. Yeah. That people have said, that have told me have happened to them and their families, and the elderly in Quebec that were left to die alone in their own urine and feces, starving, unmedicated, and not getting any water, just abandoned and neglected. Was that a nuisance?
Was that because home care couldn't come, or what?
That's right. It was because of the pandemic.
Right.
So in some of these nursing homes, of course, the first people that took off were all the bureaucrats, doctors, nurses. So then you had healthcare aides, that weren't coming into work or were overworked, that they were understaffed.
Yeah. And
these elderly literally died in their beds, in their own urine, starving, right? They were dehydrated. So this is the stuff that happened during the pandemic.
Yeah. That's
so,
okay.
Yeah. And so, to me, that's a nuisance.
Yeah. Well, it's beyond
that's a crime
nuisance.
against humanity,
crime.
is what it is.
And when I'm saying, this, but I just want to say to listeners, like when I say it's a nuisance, I'm like bringing it down to like the most simple thing. And it's like, even if you were just like a nuisance, to have that response means that it's actually so much bigger than you guys just being a nuisance. It's actually to have such an extreme response to a movement. It's because there's like an actual desire to not have that side of the story to be heard at all.
Yes.
That because if we start to hold this whole thing that happened during that time, if we start to hold all of it, it's painful.
That's a lot.
Like maybe we might even fucking cry about it. Maybe we might even be like, shit, I had no idea how complicated this was. If it's just as simple as stay in your home and don't contact people and like just listen to the government. If it was that simple, great. You know what? It wasn't. No. People were deeply impacted. People were suicidal. People were mentally ill. People were stuck in abusive homes. Children were stuck with abusive parents and they couldn't go to school. And the only reprieve that they ever had was to go to school. And you know what? They stayed at home with the alcoholic parents that were beating them. And, people don't think about that. I do, because I'm a therapist.
Yeah,
and this is the shit I think about. And this is the stuff I'm in contact with. And so if we let the whole story come out of the impact of that time and how voices weren't heard and how people were silenced and people were deeply hurt, then it's a tragedy that we all have to sit with. And those of us who were blind and just wanted it to be simple and kept their blinders on and just wanted to listen have to face the fact that it wasn't just the people that were impacted by COVID specifically, it was all the people that were impacted by the measures as well. And that it wasn't a proper risk analysis that was done. We had no idea of how people have been hurt and demoralized and affected by that experience. And I think that was one of the main reasons why you guys were such a threat, was because it was bringing this other side of the impact of the pandemic forward. Yes. And people didn't want to hear that because that would mean that the government made a fucking mistake.
That's
and God forbid the government make a fucking mistake.
But then you also have to realize the denialism factor too for people that had taken the vaccine after that also, right? Or, that they were just in denial because they didn't want to admit that they were wrong.
Right. Or that they Right. I mean, it's hard. It's hard to admit we're wrong.
Yeah.
It is. And yet it's time,
Yeah.
It's time to admit that maybe you were a bit closed-minded, or maybe you wanted the best for people and you thought that was the choice.
That's right.
Well,
and I've even often thought about this because obviously I'm not a Justin Trudeau fan, but I've often thought, not just for myself, my perspective, but from collectively, what if he would have just came out and apologized and said, you know what? This was a crazy time. We might have made some mistakes. We made some mistakes. We're sorry. And then I thought to myself, like, could he come back from that? Could I respect that after not respecting that man? And I thought, everybody makes mistakes. But we have had a prime minister that never admitted to making everything was somebody else's fault, or they experienced it differently, or his screw ups were a teaching moment for us all. But I've often wondered, if that would have happened and he would have come out, like, could that have changed things? Right? Even after the convoy, like not even having anything to do with the convoy.
Even on his way out.
Even on his way out.
Even on his way out, if he was like...
I could respect that.
Yeah.
I could respect that. But I mean, like you said, they just doubled down, especially through the convoy. It was like every choice they made was the wrong choice. Like I was watching, like when we were driving and all of a sudden he's going into isolation and then he's got COVID and then they're skirting him out of Ottawa for his own safety. Like, give me a break. His own safety? Like, we're just middle-class Canadians. Like, what is he escaping from?
Yeah.
So anyways, it's...
But I would just want to say it, like, again, that's a reflection of where many of us are at in our inability to, I just want to tie that back. It's like, that's a reflection of where we're at in our own personal and spiritual growth as a collective, the inability to admit that we've made mistakes, the inability to say with humility, like, damn, I had no idea what was going on there, and I just did the best that I could, and it was a mistake, and I didn't mean to hurt you, and I didn't, thinking about the families that were torn apart over that time, thinking about, the things that some of my friends said to me and how I was made fun of at times for my choices. It's like, it would just be great if people were like, I thought that by doing that, I was doing the right thing. And,
I mean, yeah, exactly. I don't think there is no, if your intentions are in the right place, I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with that at all, right? It's really, to me, it's about intention, what the intent is behind it. But unfortunately, that never happened, and we'll probably never see that man apologize. And I'm just so glad he's gone. I hope I never have to see his face again.
I think other people feel similarly to you. So I wanted to I just remembered something I wanted to say or ask about. So one of the biggest, another part, and coming back to the convoy, because we keep circling back.
Yeah, that's okay.
There was a point in which there was, it was when the truckers on the other side of the border started to get involved. And
in the States, you mean?
Yeah, I think so. And then that's when there was like all of this, things started to get more serious. Wasn't there? Because wasn't there going to be some food routes blocked or something?
Well, I think, we did have a lot of American support. There was truckers that had come up from the States. Then there was the, pardon me?
There was barricades or something?
Oh, at the block, yeah. So there was the Coutts border where there was a protest they'd set up there. Well, actually, there was, I think, Surrey, Emerson, Coutts, Windsor, obviously. There was a few where these little protests had sprung up. And Windsor, the Windsor Bridge was one of them. The two that made the most news were Coutts for obvious reasons, and then the Windsor Bridge. And so, they were trying to say that it was impacting the economy, that these were blocked. First of all, my parents went through. They drive a pilot truck. My parents went through Coutts border. It was the RCMP who had the road blocked. Just like in Ottawa, we didn't have any roads blocked, but the city of Ottawa came in and started dropping Jersey barriers and heavy equipment and blocking the roads, right? So, but Windsor was, they had blocked the bridge. But the thing about truckers is that they deal with this stuff all the time. So they just find a different route.
Right.
Right? That's plain and simple. It would be no different if the bridge had completely collapsed. They would do the same thing. They'd find another route.
Right. So it wasn't that those things actually got stopped, or that that was kind of the rhetoric that was coming through.
Well, that's what they wanted you to believe, but it wasn't true.
Right.
It wasn't true. Yeah.
Thanks.
They tried to say that we were losing millions or billions or whatever every day in trade, and that just simply wasn't true.
Right. Yeah.
So.
Okay. Thanks for speaking to that. So, I want to look at my questions.
Yeah, for
to
sure.
see if there's anything I've missed. We've covered a lot of things.
We did. No kidding, eh? And I feel like we haven't even scratched the surface, you know?
I know.
Funny.
So, for those of you who want to actually get into the nitty gritty of the convoy and what happened in your case, like the book is an easy read. It's not grueling. It's very well written.
Thank
like
you.
an easy, it really is. It's like I flew through it, and yet it's just dense with information. And I would encourage you to, because obviously I'm not a journalist. I didn't go through my plan here wasn't to come to you with all of this counter argument and trying to suss you out to see, I was curious about who you are and to be in the same space as you and to hear your perspective. And, just some of the questions that come off the top of my head about the convoy, but definitely worth a read to understand in depth more of what we've talked about here. And then, I don't think you're done with this. I am studying astrology, which we talked about, and I looked at your chart with my teacher. And Martin says, "Wow, mouthpiece for the collective for sure." I was thinking maybe we should do a chart analysis with Martin and set it up as second as a podcast or something. But there is something. It's your astrology chart is very curious. You have a conjunction of Sun and Mercury with Pluto and Mars. All are in conjunction. So what that means is that all those planets are basically in the same spot.
Right.
And so, even if you don't understand astrology, that's crazy for one to have. And so Mercury and the Sun, Mercury is about communication, right?
Yes.
And then the Sun is how you show up in the world. So you have this Mercury and how you show up in the world. And then you have Mars, which is the warrior archetype.
Right. Yes.
And then you have Pluto, which is the collective unconscious. And so all of those are together. And so and it's aspecting something else, but even just when you sit with that, you see that there's this deep fate of being this communication warrior, for the collective.
Wow.
I
I've done a lot of spiritual stuff. I mean, I saw a numerologist. Oh, we got so much to talk about. I got to come back sometime. But for myself, I'm a Reiki master teacher. And so my 30s, I spent a lot of time working with crystals and herbs and, just all a bunch of different stuff that I was really, really interested in. I've never learned astrology, but, I used to follow it a little bit. So, but I mean, I think everything's connected. I mean, I think energies influence everything. And I think you said something earlier that made me think of, as within or as above, so as within, right? Yeah. So that's really cool.
Yeah.
I'm an 11. I know I'm an 11. My life path is an 11.
And so that is...
So it's politicians, old soul, basically an old soul. It's a master number. And actually, you should look it up. It's pretty funny. It's actually fits me to a T, but...
It's wild.
But a lot of the reading that I've done on stuff like that is I very much resonate with a lot of it. So,
well, and it's interesting because we have a really intense consumerist spiritual culture that has generated over the last little while, which is of course I'm glad that people are becoming more open and all of this, and yet I'm also quite critical of that becoming this consumer, this consumerist thing of well, it's just not rooted. I guess it's for me, I'm always interested in that which is deeply rooted and not just another form of dissociation from what is here, from pain. And I think you get that. So I'm not saying this because of you, but I'm just sharing. Whereas we look at something like astrology, it's been around for hundreds of years and it's one of the first sciences. And we start to understand as you dive in, the depth of mythology and the depth of archetypal psychology that is inherent in astrology. Whereas so many of us just have connection with astrology in the newspaper,
or just an app on our phone.
That's right. Which is fun. I'm not going to say it's not fun, but some of these things are actually deeply rooted and actually help us come into better relationship with our pain, come into the ability to actually feel that which is uncomfortable and to understand parts of our personality and ourselves that need to be better integrated and need to be seen, versus just the fluff that keeps us excited and kind of like moving away from that which needs to be felt.
Yes.
And so, yeah.
And there's suffering is a part of life. And the suffering is really, I think, in a lot of ways, how we learn our lessons, right?
Yeah.
And so, I mean, it is an essential part of human life.
It's refinement.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
And it's how, it's in how you deal with it, I think, that creates who you are.
Yeah. Yeah. Versus, some of these things can be ways to avoid the pain.
The victim. I mean, I could sit here and say, oh, poor me, this is happening. Oh, poor me, poor me, poor me. But I'm just not that person.
That's not who you are.
Right. So.
No. Oh, and actually, I want to speak to this, and we should have started with this, but here we are near the end speaking to this. But, you're a Métis woman.
Yes, I am.
And you started your book that way. And to me, when you started your book that way, it's like, I'm a Métis woman. And that was conveniently never spoken about because I'm not a Métis woman standing up for the things that a Métis woman needs to be standing up for in regards to like land rights or whatever, we have this idea of like what an Indigenous or Métis woman is supposed to protest about versus like what you are protesting about. And I mean, that was really like, that was a really
and
good
they didn't
way.
believe me.
Yeah.
They tried to call me a liar, and which they would have never done if I would have been there for, something that the government was advocating for, protesting. But and then APTN, they had reached out to my lawyer to ask for my documents because they thought I was lying about my heritage. And I remember Diane Magus was my lawyer at that time, and she said, well, it's really your decision. Like, it's not, you don't owe these guys anything, but it might just shut them up. Or you can just hand them. And I said, I have no problem handing over my stuff. So I had to send them like a picture of my card and some documentation proving who I was.
And what's APT?
APTN?
Yeah,
the Aboriginal News Network.
I see.
I can't remember.
And so you did. You were just like, yeah.
But I never got an apology. They ran that I had proven and that I was a member of the Alberta Métis Association, but there was no retraction. There was no apology.
Right. Yeah. I mean, but right off the bat, it's like, that's an important part of the story that I was never told, I mean, and is it? It's like, it is if you're like in the current zeitgeist of like naming all your identities and all your things.
Of course. Yeah. And I mean, we were talking at that time when we have a prime minister that supposedly the Indigenous and women's issues were the most important thing on the fucking planet.
Then we have an Indigenous Métis woman leading up a convoy for freedom, and all
another one that got ran over by a horse.
Right.
Yeah.
Which was clear, like honestly, the most devastating thing to see.
It was terrible. It was terrible. Yeah, and so I just listened to this book. My daughter had it, and I got the audiobook, and it's called "The Northwest Is Our Mother." And it's the story of the Métis people in Canada, which obviously is really cool because it has a lot to do with Manitoba. And but I was reading this book, and it really struck me. As you get to the part where Canada's forming and they're running the Métis out, and I mean, the tactics that they used, the propaganda and that they used against the Métis people, as well as law enforcement, to bully them out of there. And what struck me the most is that we're talking about the late 1800s, mid to late 1800s, and nothing has changed. Everything has changed, but everything stayed the same. And that really struck me. That really struck me reading that book. And especially, well, I mean, a lot of people know the history of the Métis people, right? But I mean, like I said, when you read it, it's really unsettling. The similarities that I drew between everything that was happening to our people back then, how they were being treated, and how they were being bullied, and what's happening today.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it seems like the resistance is in your blood.
Kind of is, yeah. I might be a little bit of a rebel.
It actually might be in your blood.
But I'm a nice rebel, though.
You really are.
I joke with Chris Barber all the time. I'm like, I'm the nice, you're the spice.
Yeah, well, you are. And the thing is you're actually open to conversation. And I so appreciate you being here today and being willing to.
I'm so glad I could come.
Yeah, and we're going to connect again. I'm certain of that. Mm-hmm. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you for having me.